So welcome everyone to Elizabeth Coleman Center for the Advancement of Public Action. Thank you for coming out on a cold evening for a very important conversation. We're so pleased to have Jennifer Taub as our guest tonight, who is very, very knowledgeable about the area that we're going to be inquiring. And so I'm going to turn it over to Senator Campion, who's our Director of Public Policy Programs at CAPA, to introduce Jennifer and get us started.
So knowing that we wanted and needed to have a conversation around impeachment, Susan and I asked Tom McHenry, president of Vermont Law School, who best to facilitate such a discussion. Without missing a beat, Jennifer Taub, he said, if you can get her. Lucky us. This evening is an opportunity to better understand the process that Congress and the American people are going through. Have questions answered, and join friends, neighbors, and students to discuss this important historic moment. Professor Taub is the Bruce W. Nichols Visiting Professor of Law at Harvard Law School for fall 2019, and a professor at Vermont Law School. She's a legal scholar and advocate whose research and writing focuses on corporate governance, banking, and financial market regulation, and white-collar crime. She holds a BA from Yale University and a JD from Harvard Law School. Taub was quoted last week in the banner as saying, as a law professor, whenever there's something in the news of public interest, it creates a story that allows us to teach about the law. It's my job to help teach about the statutes. It's an interesting and important opportunity to make the law more interesting because for students and for the public, it's something that's happening right now. We are honored to have Professor Taub on campus for what will undoubtedly be a lively and important discussion. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jennifer Taub.
Thank you so much, Senator Campion, and thank you for everyone here at CAPA for inviting me and Bennington College and all of you for turning out on a very cold night to talk about this topic. I know there are other places you might be or wish to be, and I'm thinking in particular that some of you may have given up invitation to a family holiday party down at the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., where the Attorney General of I guess I should say the United States, but the Attorney General of the United States, Bill Barr, is spending $30,000 of his own personal funds apparently, and just happened to choose Trump's hotel to hold his event. So again, thank you for being here and not there. I'd like to set out a roadmap for my remarks so you know where we're headed. And I also want to warn you that because I am a law professor, it might be my tendency just to call on you. I won't cold call anyone. It'd be too difficult because I don't have your name cards or well, I know some of your names. But if there's a moment that I have some Q&A, I might throw things out and you can just raise your hand and I'll point at you and you can just shout at me. Okay, so what I'm hoping to do is to first talk about how the process of impeachment began here with Donald Trump, what's happening right now, what the next steps are that we should expect, and also throw out some wild cards because no one can really predict what will happen next exactly. I also want to address not just the process here, but the substantive question as to whether the campaign by President Trump to pressure the Ukrainian president to announce an investigation both of Vice President Biden as well as to try to investigate or stir up the false claim that Ukraine and not Russia had interfered in our election, whether that campaign is impeachable And also separately, is it criminal? And then I want to talk about what we might expect in the coming weeks in terms of the actual articles of impeachment that might be introduced and passed in the House. And I want to probably open a discussion at this point, because I think it's an important one, is by focusing narrowly, which looks like might happen here, what's being left out. Can things that are being left out still be brought in, such as the Mueller investigation, and what are the other things that might have been important to address now? So I know that you probably can't read this small print, and so I'm only going to highlight a few things here. What I want to also say is I'm happy to make these slides available to folks later if it's something that a resource you might find helpful. So how this all started, this happened pretty quickly. August 12th of this summer, a whistleblower, we still don't know his or her name, filed a complaint through the official process that he was supposed to, or they were supposed to follow, saying that Trump had used the power of his office to solicit interference from a foreign country in the 2020 election. None of us knew that's what the content or the main point of the complaint was at the time, but that's what happened. And he gave this complaint, as he was supposed to Michael Atkinson, who is the Inspector General for the intel community, because we have found out later that the whistleblower worked for the CIA, so that was his process, and he had been stationed in the White House, as was his job, to work there. So he gave that on August 26th. And in the letter, after reading the letter, he gave it to him on August 12th, and then on August 26th, Michael decided to forward the letter to Joseph McGuire, who is the acting director of national intelligence. And when he forwarded the letter, he said that he found it of urgent concern, that it seemed credible, and also alerted McGuire that under the law, McGuire had 7 days to forward it to the key House committee chairs. 7 days passed, and 7 more days, and some more days, and McGuire did not forward the letter. The next thing that happens is Atkinson decides that was intolerable and sent a letter to those committee chairs letting them know of the existence of this whistleblower report, but not the actual content itself. That is how we today, this was a key day, September 9th, because of this letter was made public, then we all started to freak out, basically, that's the legal term. Because it really sounded like an echo of what we had seen before. The allegations that Trump had sought, well, we saw him on television do it, sought the help of Russia in the 2016 election, and now what we knew at that time, that is apparently Trump was doing the same thing again. No one knew what the country was, but we would soon find out. So that was September 9th. Next thing that happens is on September 11th, the U.S. releases $390 million of aid that Congress had authorized. Coincidence? I don't know. September 19th, and this was, even for Rudy Giuliani standards of batshit crazy, sorry, all these Latin terms that you may not know. I don't know if you happened to see him on the Chris Cuomo show that night. It's really something to behold. We really shouldn't be laughing at him because I make light of this stuff, but in the end, the Giuliani approach might end up prevailing, just to be clear. So I laugh, it's a kind of gallows humor. I just want to let you know. But he was on Chris Cuomo, and Cuomo corners him, and he said that yes, he in fact did go to Ukraine himself, Giuliani, to ask them to investigate the Bidens. Shortly after that, I think that was a Thursday, we have on Sunday night, Trump is asked by reporters, and he tells them that he had been on a call on July 25th with the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, and admits, basically, if you can kind of read this word salad, that he had asked Ukraine to investigate Biden, and he said it was largely the fact that we don't want our people, like Vice President Biden and his son, creating to the corruption already in the Ukraine. Okay, So this should have all been quite shocking, because now we have the president actually admitting that what we knew about this whistleblower report was true. Then, Speaker Pelosi, and I think actually at that point, I don't have it on here, the transcript of the call is released. Speaker Pelosi announces on the 24th the official impeachment inquiry, and this is when she gives the speech saying it's a republic if you can keep it, echoing Franklin, and that the times have found out. So you can see that this was pretty quick. From the time that Congress knew, September 9th, of this, kind of the nature of this allegation, to September 24th, just a couple of weeks, she announced an official impeachment inquiry. And then after that, I know this slide is not fully appearing, the official vote, the resolution on October 31st, was when the House voted 232 to 196 to announce, to approve a resolution setting out an official impeachment process. Okay, so that's how it all started. So you could say that the impeachment process began September 24th. That will be important in a moment. I want to also point out to you, going backwards, this picture here is not my photo, but a photo from online. This is Nancy Pelosi on October 31st, the day when it was officially announced that the vote was taken for the resolution for impeachment. Okay, so that's how it started. This has all happened quite quickly. And I actually need to say it now, though, just so if you look at these dates while it's on my mind. There are people who have been saying, namely Jonathan Turley, who was the expert witness invited, if you happen to see it, to the House Judiciary Committee hearing last week to talk about the legal aspects of impeachment. And he said this is just happening too fast. And yet, if you go back and look at the Clinton impeachment, it was 72 days from when the impeachment investigation began and when the articles of impeachment were approved. So now in this case, we're talking about 71 days, and we don't even have the articles approved. So there's precedent for things moving at this pace. So what they voted on, and I'm not going to go into, I wanted you to get the timeline in detail. I'll kind of move more quickly now from here. What this House Resolution 660 that was voted on is what you'll hear them mentioning a lot. And this has created the path and the process. It created the rules for public hearings. It created the obligation for the House Intelligence Committee to write a public report and release it. It also divided the role between the Intelligence Committee to compile a report and evidence, and then the Judiciary Committee to draft the articles. It, however, also allowed the Judiciary Committee process to invite the lawyers, the president's lawyers, to intervene and provide a defense. And they were permitted to cross-examine witnesses in the House. They could call their own witnesses. This is something the president still has the right to do, but those witnesses have to be approved by the chair, not just by the ranking member. And then they, based on this resolution, that the House set up its own procedures. And this was signed by all the committee chairs. Okay. The main idea was transparency, open hearings so the American people will learn firsthand about the president's misconduct. So in short, if the timeline didn't get it across, what we're talking about here, this was a November 6th article by Andrew Kramer in the New York Times. I think this captures it perfectly well, much better than the legalese. And this is Dateline Kyiv, Ukraine. It was early September, and Ukraine's new president, Volodymyr Zelensky, faced an agonizing choice, whether to capitulate to President Trump's demands to publicly announce investigations against his political enemies, or to refuse and lose desperately needed military aid. Only Mr. Trump could unlock the aid. He had been told by 2 United States senators, and time was running out. If the money, nearly $400 million, were not unblocked by the end of the fiscal year on September 30th, it could be lost in its entirety. This was the lead up to the phone call that President Trump had with Volodymyr Zelensky, in which he said to him, that's nice, but we need you to do us a favor, though, and brought up the investigations of both Biden's son, and the server, the distraction to make it look like Ukraine had interfered in our elections. Okay, this is the fun part where I'm gonna call on you. Then we had the public hearings. Intense 2 weeks, only 5 days of hearings over those 2 weeks. And here were these witnesses, and I thought this would be a good moment. It's like when I teach white collar crime on the first day, I have pictures of people like Charles Ponzi, Martha Stewart, and I go around the room, I say, who is this, And there's always one student who knows everybody, and then we all keep an eye on them. I made that joke one time, and a student thought I was calling him a criminal, and so I can't do that one again. Okay, so I want to ask, I'm going to start here. Who's the person, I'm going to do the back row first, from left to right. Who's the guy in the bow tie? Shout it out, who is it? George Kent? Okay, and you might not know his title, he was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. Who's next to Kent? Bill Taylor. He's the Charge d'Affaires, right? He's an acting ambassador for Ukraine. Who's next to Bill Taylor? So I heard people say that a lot of people know who she is, Masha Yovanovitch or Marie Yovanovitch, right? But based on who knows the names, we can tell who was the more popular witness here, I guess. What about the person next to her? I hear Pence related, Pence adjacent, yes. This is Jennifer Williams. Yes, Jennifer Williams, who was the State Department assistant to Vice President Pence. Who's the guy, serious-looking guy in a military uniform next to her? Yep, Alexander Vindman. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. I don't want to. Yeah, and who's next to Vindman? Kurt Volker, Special Envoy to Ukraine. On this row, who in this row was a witness that the Republicans wanted to come? Volker, that was the only one. Okay, good. You're all doing good. Okay, let's do the bottom row. It gets a little more difficult on the bottom row. Who's that guy in the bottom left?
Morrison.
Who said that? Okay, what does Morrison do? Anyone know?
He resigned.
He did resign, but before he resigned, National Security Council. Whose job did he take? We'll find out. Okay, Fiona Hill's job. Okay, who's next to Morrison? Everyone knows Gordon Sondland. Is it because of his hotels, or what was his job? Right, ambassador to the European Union, but also on the sort of shadow State Department, or as Fiona Hill would say, what are the three amigos? Oh right, we got, who's the other amigo up there? Volker, and unfortunately let's not talk about the third amigo yet. Yeah, oh, you talked about it. Okay, who's next to, so you're not gonna get this guy, the one next to Sondland, who's that? See? That's a difficult one. Anyone know? His name is David Hale.
Oh, yeah, he's a worker.
Yeah, Deputy Assistant Secretary. Oh, no, that's the other David. See? How could you forget? Okay, but David Hale, since we forgot him, he was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia. And when pushed, he did stand up for Masha Yovanovitch when pushed. Okay, and who's next to him? Laura Cooper. She's Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. And next to her, of course, Dr. Fiona Hill, and
The other
David, the guy who heard the phone call in which, can you help me? What did he say? What did he hear? Who did he hear say what to whom on the phone in a cafe? Oh, he did hear. There's a lot of phone calls. He was the one who said, no quid pro quo. You're right. No quid pro quo. I want nothing. He heard that apparently. But what else? No, he said that. That's what Gordon said. But that's not what Holmes heard. What did Holmes?
Sondland, Trump told Sondland that he didn't give X for Ukraine. He just wanted to investigate.
And also, and again another Latin term, he said about Vladimir Zelensky, he loves your ass. It's so fun, this Trump administration has really freed up my vocabulary. Okay, so there's the answer sheet, y'all. Okay, so I'm not gonna read all these, but there were a lot of no-shows. So we had a dozen shows, and we had about a dozen no-shows. And also, in response to 71 subpoenas, not a single document was produced by the White House. The only thing the White House has produced is what?
The summary of the phone call.
The summary of the phone call. It's the only thing that they produced, summary of the phone call. But they did that voluntarily because they thought it exonerated the president, which shows you the kind of talent they have there. Okay, so there were 71 subpoenas, not a single document, and they subpoenaed, they asked for documents from the White House, from the Office of the Vice President, and the Department of Energy. We have seen some documents because the State Department recently was forced to produce 99 pages pursuant to a FOIA request of an ethics watchdog group who's going to be getting monthly installments of these things. But some of the key players, I mean, some of these names I don't know, but obviously Mick Mulvaney, who was acting White House Chief of Staff and head of OMB, he hasn't showed up. John Bolton, who's probably out on a pre-book tour speaking gig right now, has not showed up. John Eisenberg, that was the lawyer who everybody went to, who was the one who, accidentally took the call record and put it on a secret server with name-only access. Then there's Michael Ellis, who I think worked with him. And then, of course, our third amigo, Rick Perry, Secretary of the Department of Energy, who at one time on the debate stage when he was running for president, I know you all know this, but let's just remember, he said that we need to get rid of a few government, yes?
How can these people legally no-show for subpoenas?
Yeah.
How does that work?
I'm so glad you asked that. What's your name?
Lynn Mazza.
Lynn? Lynn, I think it has a lot to do with, things are winding their way through the courts, but you might say to yourself, why hasn't somebody why wouldn't someone prosecute them for doing this, right? Why wouldn't that be what would happen? And I'd like to remind you, I don't know if were you here at the beginning when I mentioned the holiday party? William Barr. So I don't think that there's going to be a criminal process against them for obstruction brought by William Barr. He doesn't seem to be itching to dust off any indictments. And I know there's a process where you can be in inherent contempt, but no one in Congress is going to lock somebody in a hotel. That would just be a farce. And so what is actually happening right now, which is good, is congressional committee is still trying to get William McGahn, if you saw this, to testify in connection with the Mueller, the Russia investigation. That I think it was a House Oversight Committee. I'm not sure for sure if it's that one. And we just had a judge in D.C. District Court judge say he has to show up, but he's going to appeal that. So eventually, it's going to get up to the Supreme Court, and if McGahn has to show up, then Bolton and all these folks will have to show up. It's just, but I think the question you have to ask yourself is, even if Mulvaney showed up, would he take the fifth anyway at that point? And, yeah. But still, that's what's happening. So you asked a great question. And also what I want to say is, don't get the idea that you, Lynn, can just not show up. That's what I'm thinking. So some of the remedies, they did build some things in. I'm answering your question a little bit. But under Resolution 660, after that I mentioned that the House has its own procedures. And in their own procedures that they made, the Judiciary Committee, they created this procedure that said if the President refuses to make witnesses available, then they can deny him witnesses he wants to bring. They haven't even invoked that because the President has said, I'm not playing, through Pat Cipollone, who interestingly signs, he's the White House lawyer. Have you noticed he signs his name in Sharpie, which, red flag, or black flag, I guess, in that case. Okay, so we were just talking about the judge, is Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, and she had ruled on November 25th McGahn had to testify. What's happening now is there's going to be oral arguments on January 3rd at the DC Court of Appeals. But in the meanwhile, McGahn sought a stay of her order, and she refused the stay. So now he's got to appeal. There's a lot moving around, but I expect in January, long after the articles of impeachment have been voted on by the House, this stuff will continue to play out. Okay, Well, let me just read this, because this is actually such a great sentence. 2 sentences about the rule of law. In this district court decision for November 25th saying McGann had to testify, here's what she wrote. In reality, it is a core tenet of this nation's founding that powers of a monarch must be split between the branches of the government to prevent tyranny. And she also wrote, DOJ's, meaning the Department of Justice's, conceptual claim to unreviewable absolute testimonial immunity on separation of powers grounds. Essentially, the Constitution scheme countenances unassailable executive branch authority is baseless and as such cannot be sustained. Things like that, just, it's like, I never thought there'd be a day when I care about executive authority. That's a part of constitutional law that a lot of us progressives kind of like, who cares about this? Let's talk about equal protection. Yeah, but now this is, our whole republic depends on judges like this right now. Okay, so I'm still telling you, so what I was trying to talk about before was the kind of the timeline. First I said this whole thing got underway on October 31st. Then I mentioned just now that we had the hearings. After the hearings, pursuant to Res 660, the public report was released by the House Permanent Subcommittee on Intelligence, or what we call the House Intelligence Committee. And that report, we'll get to what it said, but not surprisingly, it focused on that the campaign leading up to the phone call as being impeachable, as well as the obstruction. We'll talk about that a bit in a moment. The next thing, I mean, this is all happening. Was this just like less than a week ago? Okay. Then on Wednesday, December 4th, which was my birthday, yeah, thank you. I got a really, really good present, which was the House Judiciary Committee's first impeachment hearing. Couldn't be a better present for me. So it was a day-long hearing, a little boring though, actually. A bunch of lawyers, right? And what they said, I took some excerpts. I highlighted in blue the ones that were witnesses called by the Democrats and the one in red called by the Republicans. And just so you know, this is a completely common practice. I have testified before congressional committees on banking topics, for example, and both the House and the Senate Banking Committee. And at the time, both the House and the Senate were controlled by Republicans. And so I was like the one Democratic witness, and there'd be like 5 bills and I had to cover all of them. And then there were 4 Republican witnesses who were like lobbyists who covered the others. So this is not a new thing. And I don't know how state hearings work, but this is common in Congress. So what their job was not to talk about the facts, not to be fact witnesses, but to say, and by the way, they had not seen the report, right? The report came out the night before. They hadn't read through the report. They based their legal conclusions on the testimony of those 12 witnesses we saw and all the depositions, the behind the scenes sworn interviews of them and other witnesses. And based on that, they were trying to draw, saying, assuming that everything is true, that we were looking at the weight of this evidence, is this impeachable? Professor Noah Feldman of Harvard said, this clearly constitutes an impeachable high crime and misdemeanor under the Constitution, namely Trump's conduct. Michael Gerhardt said, it was serious misconduct, including bribery, soliciting a personal favor from a foreign leader in exchange for his exercise of power, and obstruction Congress are worse than the misconduct of any prior president. Pamela Karlan said, it shows a president who did this to strong-arm a foreign leader into smearing one of the president's opponents in our ongoing election season. If we are to keep faith with the Constitution, President Trump must be held to account. And Professor Jonathan Turley, in addition to having an angry dog and such, are we being taped? Oh, no. I'll talk to me later. Oh, I can say anything publicly. When I first spoke out, the first time I ever was on national television was after the Trump Tower meeting of 2016 was revealed. And so that happened in July of 2017. And I was one of the first people who said, this sounds criminal. I didn't say it was criminal. I can't remember what exactly I said on the program, but I explained why it could be a conspiracy to violate campaign laws. Mm-hmm. And he wrote some kind of he made me sound like I didn't know what the law was on the topic. And so I've kept that in my mind. I don't have a good memory, unlike the president, but I have not forgotten this. So anyhow, so he said, but here's, even though he was brought in by the Republicans, and even though, as you know, you may have known, that he argued for Bill Clinton's impeachment, he said, and this could still be impeachable conduct, okay? But it undermines that effort to distort the historical record by comparisons to Nixon, he said. He didn't want to do that. He also said it was too rushed. And again, as I had earlier noted, it's been 71 days since Speaker Pelosi announced the House would begin a formal impeachment. So that was the September 24th date. And it was 70 days between the authorization of the Clinton impeachment and the actual impeachment. So this is, the problem, it not being able to fact check in real time is a real problem, but what he was saying and the impression he's giving the public is that this is rushed, and it's just not rushed by historical comparison. Okay, so, this is the letter. So this happened Friday. Yeah, so we're now getting on Sunday. This is getting closer, I'm feeling kind of closed in here. This is Pat Cipolloni's letter. And by the way, he's a very smart lawyer. He went to Fordham undergrad and was like top of valedictorian in his class. I forgot where he went to, it doesn't really matter where he went to law school, but I think he went to Chicago. Super smart guy. And he signed this letter that seems like the equivalent, it's the legal letter equivalent of that doctor who wrote the medical opinion. What is that guy's name? Tim. If you remember, let me know. Interrupt at any time. This is why I always have my phone nearby, but I put it there so I wouldn't start tweeting while I was talking. Okay, so Nadler responded with a statement, and put it on Twitter because this is where our discourse is. Back in the Revolutionary era, people sent pamphlets to each other, and now we sent tweets to each other. So he says, having declined this opportunity, the president cannot claim that the process is unfair. The president's failure will not prevent us from carrying on our solemn constitutional duty. It's not clear the president has said, well, I won't participate ever, but right now he seems to be declining. And then yesterday, and no, I didn't read this entire report, this came out. So this is the House, this is not a committee report, but it's the staff. The staff for the Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee put out a report, and it's really a legal report looking at the grounds for impeachment. And you can read that, but before reading the report, I said this, and so we're just gonna go with this for now, and then you can, complain to the management if upon reading the report you think it contradicts me. Okay, so where we are now, and we'll talk about the grounds, and I just wanna see where I am time-wise. I'm still okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's where we are now. It's like December. The House Judiciary Committee is going to continue hearings. Tomorrow there'll be hearings, and we're going to hear from the counsel from the Intelligence Committee and Judiciary. So we're going to be hearing probably from Intelligence, we're probably going to be hear from Dan Goldman, and then from Judiciary we'll probably hear from Norm Eisen and Barry Burke. And they're going to summarize. I think this is the way that the House Judiciary Committee is going to present a summation of the evidence of what happened in intelligence. There's been a lot of complaining from some of the Republicans who are focused on process and not on substance, which is because that's all they can focus on. I mean, in fairness, if I should be fair, that's what they've got. And they're complaining that it's the Judiciary Committee who's supposed to run impeachment. So this is their way of bringing the evidence in to the Judiciary Committee. Then, in December, sometime this month, maybe this coming week, Chair Nadler and his committee are going to draft the actual articles. Then they're going to vote on them. Then it will go, Nancy Pelosi will bring it to the full House. Representatives, all this is supposed to happen in December. We keep hearing by the 19th or 20th of December. While this is happening, you may have heard this, Move On and other organizations are organizing, you can sign up now, nationwide rallies for the night before the vote. So there'll be an announcement, you have to notice a vote. And so Nancy Pelosi at some point is going to announce we're ready to vote. And then if you want to encourage the vote or discourage it or whatever you want to do, there'll be events, rallies. There are already 400 of them across the country. Okay, so that's happened in December. And then January, perhaps, It's up to the House whether they refer the impeachment to the Senate. If they do, in January and/or February, or maybe never, depending on Mitch McConnell, I don't know, there'll be a trial in the Senate. And what could happen at this trial would be an acquittal, or a conviction and removal. Now, people keep saying you need 2/3 of the Senate, but actually that is not what the Constitution says. Where's my Constitution? If I can just trust me, it's 2/3 of those present. Now, yes,
Is it true that once it gets into the Senate, a senator can make a motion to dismiss, have it voted on immediately, and dismiss the whole thing?
that's not the current rules. And this, we're gonna get to what the rules are in the Senate, but those rules could be changed through any kind of vote. So anything could happen. This is a totally good, what is your name?
Carl.
Carl, it's a totally good question. That's one of the absolute wild cards. And we'll get back to Carl's wild cards in a moment. But what I'm really excited about, because I love white collar crime, is what about the future? I mean, I don't love it that way. The future criminal cases against co-conspirators and against the former president. We'll be talking about those, but it could be bribery of a public official, campaign finance violations, obstruction, conspiracy to commit the above offenses, and even more. There's always wire fraud. You can always throw that in. So let's talk, before we get to that Senate process, substantively, just for a little bit of education, here's our constitutional text. If these look like we're citing chapter and verse, one thing folks may not realize about this is how the Constitution is set up when there's the articles and then there's the amendments. But Article 1 is legislative powers. Article 2 is the executive. So in Article 2, this fourth section, says that the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So if there's a conviction, it's an instant removal, that's it. Now, Article 1 talks about how this process works. So the House shall choose their speaker and other officers and shall have the sole power of impeachment. That's why it's happening now. And sole power of impeachment means the House. So all this stuff about it not being bipartisan is really irrelevant in the Constitution. Well, there weren't really parties of this type at that time, but it's really up to the House. And the House is controlled right now by the Democrats, and that's how that works. Now the Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. And one thing that the Constitution notes is that if it's the president being tried as opposed to a judge and so on, the Chief Justice shall preside, that's John Roberts, and that you need a conference of 2/3 of the members present. Now there are some people wondering whether maybe someone will be in the cloakroom, someone else will be sick, could you get the numbers? We're nowhere near any kind of gamesmanship like that. The Senate impeachment rules are really kind of a mess, but what I would say to you is if you want to read about them, Ben Wittes in Lawfare has a nice piece, and you can also actually look at the rules. They were put in place, it's a 9-page document, amended in 1986. And it's very weirdly precise about things that we think don't matter and very vague about everything that does. So it's very precise, like when you bring your articles over to the Senate, there's specific words you have to say, like magic words and things. But it's and things that Carl cares about, very vague. So some questions we have is, will there be live witnesses? There were not in the Clinton impeachment. Instead, depositions were taken in advance and read. Apparently Donald Trump wants live witnesses, but he also wanted to release his tax return, so we'll see about that. Senator John Cornyn does not want live witnesses. He actually said, I don't want a 3-ring circus. But Ted Cruz wants witnesses, apparently, and wants Hunter Biden and the whistleblower. Okay, and that's that. So who knows if there'll be witnesses? What are the high crimes and misdemeanors? I'm going to kind of go through this quickly. It seems like in modern day we might be trying to figure out what it means, but actually it had a pretty specific meaning at the time. And so the key thing to remember here is that this was debated, and we have the records of those debates. And so at first, in 1787, there was a debate as to whether it included impeachment in the actual Constitution. And William Davie of North Carolina said that if we didn't have impeachment, the sitting president, quote, will spare no efforts or means whatever to get himself reelected. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anyone here, but Noah Feldman the other day said, actually in his written statement that accompanied his oral testimony, wrote that the words high crimes and misdemeanors were used in England for centuries, and that high meant connected to high political office, as opposed to highfalutin or something. It actually meant to a high office, and it modified both words, crimes and misdemeanors. And that it meant abuse of trust. Professor Pam Carlin at the same hearing, in her written testimony, referenced Justice Joseph Story of the Supreme Court. He had commentaries from 1833 on the Constitution about high crimes and misdemeanors, and also talked about them being an abuse of trust. So that's nice, and I mean, the Davy quote is the only contemporaneous one, right? He was just talking about the meaning, or the reason to have the actual impeachment itself. But what were the contemporaneous comments from 1788 when Alexander Hamilton, you know, the guy from the musical, was out, that was from my father, sorry. He was out there writing some of the Federalist Papers trying to get the Constitution ratified. And I think that's a very helpful guide, and no wonder that the law professors then and always cite this. And so he said, in the second paragraph of Federalist number 65, that impeachment was designed for, quote, offenses which proceed from the misconduct of public men, or in other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. So if you think about this, the grounds for impeachment in the Constitution say treason, they say bribery, they say high crimes and misdemeanors. He's obviously, in that phrase, talking about the whole thing, but obviously the high crimes and misdemeanors as well. He also said that these grounds for impeachment or these offenses are, quote, of a nature which may with peculiar propriety be denominated political as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to the society itself. The all caps are in the original.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do some examples. Let's get concrete here. The very first successful impeachment. So it was the second impeachment, the successful conviction and removal was John Pickering. He was appointed by George Washington to the federal bench. And I'm quoting from his articles. Being a man of loose morals and intemperate habits, on the 11th and 12th days of November in the year 1802, being then judge of the district court and for the District of New Hampshire, you may have sure figure it, did appear on the bench of the said court for the administration of justice in a state of total intoxication, produced by the free and intemperate use of intoxicating liquors. He was often drunk at work. This is why he was removed from office. Okay. There's also, more recently, I'm just going to bookend this for you, I spelled this wrong, sorry. It's Thomas Porteous Jr. From 2010. He was a judge, I think in the Fifth Circuit, down in the South. He was impeached in March, tried in December, and found guilty and removed from office. And he was essentially taking bribes, or people were paying him for influence. And so here's part of one of the articles. A pattern of conduct that is incompatible with the trust and confidence placed in him as a federal judge. He solicited and accepted things of value from these two lawyers, including a payment of $1,000 in cash. Okay. What's treason? What's happening now isn't treason. People often, you can use treason sort of loosely as a regular person, but as a lawyer, the Constitution says that treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them in the United States, or adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. And you know, it's not, it does not seem that we can say at this point that there's any, we can't see treason, I think, in what we're looking at here. Someone has to be a declared enemy, even though we have problems with Russia, they're not an actual enemy of ours. What's bribery? This is trickier for purposes of impeachment. So the Constitution doesn't define bribery. Pamela Carlin cited Samuel Johnson's 1792 dictionary, which she was not carrying around. She admitted it was just, she Googled it. But it meant then the giving or taking of rewards for a bad practice. That sounds awfully broad. Jonathan Turley, in contrast, tried to limit it to the Supreme Court's definition of bribery as narrowed recently in McDonald versus United States, But I believe that it's even bribery under, his conduct is even bribery under that narrow interpretation. But Turley's wrong nevertheless. Randall Eliason, an expert in white-collar crime, said, look, bribery predates the Constitution, any act of Congress. And, you know, the McDonald court was talking about a particular federal statute. That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, before we get to the articles, I want to say what's been amazing about this is you had 3 Democratic witnesses trying to look at the plain language of the US Constitution, relying on a kind of originalistic type theory, which is normally done, you would think, by Republicans and those members of the Federalist Society. And we had, after their testimony, I'm forgetting who it was one of the Republican members of the House who said, well, how did any of these law, who was it?
I think it was Collins, but I'm not
Oh, it could have been Doug Collins, yeah. How did any of these law professors even know what the founders were thinking? And I'm like, this is just, okay, and he also, I think, said, mamas, don't let your children grow up and go to Stanford, go to Stanford or Harvard, because that's where those 2 of the professors went, yeah. Okay, so what should we expect? How am I in time? Still good? Okay. What should we expect for articles? So I think we're possibly going to see an abuse of power based on conditioning aid to Ukraine on announcing the investigation into the president's political rival and the debunked theory about Ukraine. Also, we're going to see obstruction of Congress, the refusal to comply with the House committee's subpoenas and directing others not to testify. We're going to see obstruction of justice. I think we can see this. Nancy Pelosi just was it just 2 days ago, I think it might have been on Thursday, said that all roads lead to Putin. So I think we're going to see obstruction of justice stemming from the findings in the Mueller report too, which will make me really happy because I still have that Mueller, investigation spreadsheet, and so that will come in handy, I think, when I go through this. Okay. So what about the debates on timing and scope? I mean, there are benefits and drawbacks of voting before the December recess. Is this helpful in the short or long run? I want to wait. I'm going to let you ask that. We can talk about that maybe. I think there's a lot to say about that, and I want to hear your thoughts and have that conversation. But a couple things before I wrap up here. So we do have 2 presidents who recently, Clinton was actually impeached. I'm going to talk about Nixon, who articles did pass the House Judiciary Committee, even though they never went to the floor. And I think these are helpful to look at for some context, in particular because right before I began to speak, I checked Trump's Twitter feed, and he's complaining that never in the history, or he's quoting someone who said that never has a president been impeached when they weren't accused of committing a crime. And I'm like, did he not read Part 2 of the Mueller report? I mean, I don't know. But I want to look and see what does the recent precedent look like? And so with Clinton, Article 1, and Article 3 were the only 2 that made it, that passed the House. And the first one led to his committing perjury. And so the idea was that he violated his constitutional oath to faithfully execute the office of the United States. There's a lot more, and then they say that the manner subversive of the rule of law by willfully corrupting and manipulating the judicial process for personal gain and exoneration by willfully committing perjury. And this is to do with lying regarding his relationship with Monica Lewinsky, I think, or the Paula Jones civil lawsuit, right? Article 3, in the Paula Jones case, that he obstructed and impeded the administration of justice by encouraging another witness to give a perjurious affidavit. Okay, so that was the Clinton. Now he was acquitted, you might remember that. Then in 1974, for Nixon, these were the 3 articles that ended up passing the Judiciary Committee. You'll see similar language: violation of his constitutional oath faithfully to execute the office of the President of the United States, and so on. We're going to see that same kind of language. And here, and by the way, I cut these down, but the preamble to all of the articles use that kind of language. And then the first thing relates to using the powers of his high office in the course of conduct plan designed to delay, impede, and obstruct the investigation of the Watergate break-in. And they also had, so that was the main article, right? Obstruction of justice, essentially, an abuse of power related to covering up the Watergate break-in. But they had others. The second one related to him to be using the IRS, the FBI, and the CIA to go after his enemies. And then failing to respond to duly authorized subpoenas, right? So again, some of this sounds very familiar and expect to see similar language next week. Will anyone go to jail? The same facts that give rise to this impeachment inquiry, I think, form the basis of criminal indictments. Going through this really quickly. Yes, I think this is bribery under 18 U.S.C. 201. While they, if you look at the section I've given you, that even if you're a public official, and he is defined as one in the statute, if you directly or indirectly, corruptly demand, seek, or receive anything of value, for being influenced in the performance of an official act. So that seems, I'm skipping over how we would analyze this in detail. The problem is the definition of an official act. In the recent Supreme Court case, they really hewed to the exact statutory language and said that just setting up a meeting, in McDonald's case for a donor or for someone who gave him a ton of money, including a Rolex watch and such, that setting up meetings for him does not constitute an official act. However, withholding military spending, I believe, would. But again, remember, for the impeachment, this isn't relevant. Why is this relevant? This is relevant for the others who aided and abetted this or engaged in a conspiracy to do this. Think maybe Giuliani and others, right? Campaign finance violations. This goes to this idea of, in addition to the fact that Trump appears to be soliciting a bribe, he was also soliciting something of value, help. The public announcement it was going to be on CNN, to help smear what he perceived to be his opponent in the upcoming election. There's no question that this is, can be, not just a civil violation, but a felony. And there's a lot of background on this you don't need to see, but even recently, the FEC chair, Ellen Weinberg, wrote a letter July 13th. This was this is after the Mueller investigation report was out, before he testified, but saying, yeah, guess what? Asking for help from a foreign country or foreign national election is absolutely unlawful. Note the date, July 13th. And I know that he saw it because I tweeted this at the president, so. There's also conspiracy to violate the campaign finance laws, but there's conspiracy to commit bribery, and then there's a plain old thing called conspiracy to defraud the United States, with some of the folks who hacked into the computer systems have been charged with. All of these things are potential charges against his conspirators, co-conspirators. Okay, and then there's also obstruction of justice. Lots of different statutes here. I'm looking at 1512B and C, and they find this, you could be in prison not more than 20 years of both, but the guidelines, people wouldn't go to jail for that much. Anyway, here we are. I welcome your questions. I also want to point out, I started with Pelosi and I'll end with her. This is the other day when someone said, a reporter said, why do you hate Donald Trump? And she came back to the lectern and said, I don't hate anybody, I pray for the president. Well, the Trump War Room, which is a legit Twitter account, sent this out thinking this made Pelosi look bad. Nancy Pelosi is taking her hatred of impeachment questions a little too far. I think she looks not bad, but badass here. But I promise not to zap you when I call on you. So thank you all for listening.
Sure, I can back it up. Yeah. So questions, Jim?
How do you do? My name is Jim Carroll. With respect to the Mueller report and the clear case where the president told McGahn to dismiss Mueller would be a clear case of obstruction. However, when he told McGahn to lie about it, is that a crime as well?
So Jim, I'm gonna kind of answer your question in a somewhat roundabout way. Yeah, the whole second half of the second part of the Mueller report goes through many instances that could meet all the elements of obstruction. You need to have a nexus to some official proceeding. You need to have an obstructive act that's connected to some official proceeding, and you need corrupt intent, right? And for sure, I think that telling McGahn it's not entirely telling McGahn to lie. I think depending how tight you see the nexus to the then current official proceeding. By the time he was telling McGahn to go out and lie, it wasn't in the proceeding, but Mueller was already in the part of the investigation, I believe, at that point, where he said he was looking at Trump's obstruction. So I think that might be close.
I have just one follow-up on that. With respect to what is reported in the Mueller document, how are they introduced? Does there have to be a special evidentiary proceeding within Congress to get those introduced, or because it was a federal investigation based on that evidence, it can be introduced as articles of impeachment?
I think that probably the Judiciary Committee is going to introduce that into the official record, the full report. Is that?
Michael?
So early in the time when you mentioned, I think this guy Joseph McGuire, who stopped the whistleblower's report from going forward, has anyone looked into why he did that, or was he taking orders from anybody, or what's happened there?
Yeah, as I recall this, so there's this kind of dancing on the head of the pin debate as to whether he went to the White House to see whether he should report this. And I recall that he made some sort of legal determination that this didn't technically fall under the statute, and he didn't want to report it. But I think I don't remember exactly, but he did, I believe, testify.
Rob?
Do you have any view about the relationship between the Senate rules and the constitutional authority of the Chief Justice to preside over this? I mean, for example, if the Democrats asked for a subpoena to be issued to John Bolton and the Chief Justice approved it, is there any grounds in the rules for that to be overturned by voters in majority?
The rules don't speak to that.
It could be very interesting.
I mean, this is the wild cards. I mean, I think we're going to really learn a lot. And I think that I think Justice Roberts, as an institutionalist, probably wants to play as small of a limited role as he could. Yeah, so I wonder whether some of these things will be resolved. For example, maybe the McGahn, maybe the whole McGahn thing will get resolved quickly after the hearing. I don't know, but we'll have to see. It could be messy.
Question, if you can project yourself, the Senate's gonna come, so it's January. How would you rebut the Republicans' maybe prime complaint, which is Hunter Biden worked for Burisma, which was a hugely corrupt company owned by a corrupt oligarch.
Yeah.
It was 2017, so it wasn't the election season yet. Biden hadn't declared and Trump hadn't, said he was gonna run again. So, and then Hunter, as best I remember, has admitted, he said, I wouldn't have gotten the job unless my name was Biden.
Right.
Okay, so you got a corrupt company in a corrupt regime, new president, asking for the investigation. This is the argument.
Right.
It was all about corruption. And, so it wasn't really about the election yet because it's only 2017, a corrupt company. How do you rebut that? Because that's going to be their prime focus, that this was a legit question regardless of everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main rebuttal to that, I think there's three parts to it. The first part is that Trump wasn't asking for an investigation of Hunter Biden and Burisma. He was asking for a televised announcement that there was going to be an investigation. And if you really want to have a successful investigation of somebody, you don't have a public announcement before the investigation. And the second thing is, Bill Barr is the Attorney General. And if you want to investigate Hunter Biden for violating the law, he would be the person to do it. Because Ukraine is its sovereignty. We don't have an extradition treaty with them. So if the Ukrainian government decided that there was some criminal behavior by Hunter Biden, they wouldn't be able to extradite him anyway. The third thing is, nowhere in the phone call and nowhere in any of the discussions did Trump actually talk about corruption. In fact, the word corruption was included in the readout or the summary of the call he had when he first congratulated Zelensky for winning. It was only included later by the group that had prepped him for the call. He was not interested really in corruption generally in Ukraine. Plus, the person whose name we didn't remember, Laura Cooper, who worked in this area, and all the experts said that now that Zelensky had been elected, that there was actually hope that the corruption had been cleaned up. So, I mean, I think that the senators, the Republicans are going to, unless something, this is the wild card, and I welcome it, but the Senate is going to acquit. So, and they acquit, they're going to acquit. And yes, the problem, the problem with corruption and with nepotism and all this stuff and muddying the waters is that it's very easy for people to say, well, throw their hands up and say, this is all a mess. But it's not, we're looking not at, I mean, last time I checked, and granted I've been talking for an hour, but last time I checked, Hunter Biden wasn't president of the United States.
Right.
And neither was Joe Biden. And also, the fact, one thing that undermines the credibility that Trump was actually, other than those three things, I can add another, which is he was also asking to look into this CrowdStrike, the company who had helped detect that Russia had hacked into the Democratic National Committee computer system. And Trump keeps saying that CrowdStrike is owned by a Ukrainian billionaire, and it's not. It's owned by an American who was formerly from Russia. And he's repeating Putin's talking points on that. And it's been completely debunked by our intelligence, all of our intelligence community, that Ukraine had hacked into our election system. So, and because Trump has a record of lying and lying and lying and lying and lying, I look at the evidence I just gave you, I look at his credibility, and I decide that that the Republicans, yes, they can take those arguments if they want, but history will not be favorable to them. And just like I have a good memory for the mean thing Jonathan Turley said about me, I'm going to have a memory for all of these folks, and I will use if we survive, which is, I'm not entirely convinced that the country will be attacked, honestly. But I think we're really in great danger right now. But if the Republic survives and we don't end up with the Trump dynasty from now and forever, I'll remember what these folks did. And history should ridicule them for a long time.
Tony?
So one of the things that's surprised me a little about the media and public discussion of the Ukraine here is just the history we have in terms of the military aid. The Ukraine, at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, was the third largest nuclear power in the world. And the US and Russia and the UK ultimately became signatories to an agreement to protect the Ukraine's border, to protect the Ukraine, provide them with means of protection. I think it was in 1994. So I don't know if the law distinguishes the level of seriousness of the kind of extortion that went on with saying we're not going to give you these weapons. It wasn't just the question that Congress okayed the weapons, but the US has a special relationship with the Ukraine in regard to that history.
I mean, you know more about the history than I do, and thank you for that. What I'll say is I agree. I mean, I haven't highlighted the gravity of this, and as I think you know and everyone here does, is that Ukraine is right now at war with Russia, and Russia annexed Crimea, and that is the reason why we even have sanctions against Russia, and from when Hillary Clinton was in the State Department. A lot of this is all tied to concerns about Ukraine being kind of on that front line between Russia and the West. And so we're kind of playing out our hot, cold war through Ukraine. So there's a lot more going on here than just, withholding $400 million. This is of strategic importance to Russia and to the US, and as Nancy Pelosi said, all roads lead to Putin.
Tyler?
Yeah, I've been following everything pretty closely, but there's one missing link that I haven't heard. That there was a point at which I'm talking about the Mueller report, There was a point at which a federal judge opened up all that, the redacted material and the grand jury testimony in the Mueller report. And I've never heard what the consequence of that was.
Not all of it. I think there might have been a sentence here or there, but not all of it.
Not all of it.
I'm curious about why you dismissed the possibility of the treason charge so easily. When you said that there has to be an enemy, these days, no one ever declared war. So if that's the criteria, then there's never going to be an enemy. On the other hand, we have a whole lot of evidence that Russia did in fact attack us in a sense. And we have a president who is defending that attack, and a president who is furthering the misinformation by the man who ordered the attack. So doesn't that at least conceptually fit the idea of treason?
Well, this is probably the point of the talk when I should earlier said. So my expertise is white collar crime and business law. And I am not a constitutional law scholar, but I will delve into constitutional law at the intersection of either white collar crime and corporate law. So that's why I do stuff around Citizens United, do writing about that, and that's why I'm also interested in impeachment, because there are inroads. So when I look for constitutional law advice, I often honor the words of my former common law professor, Larry Tribe, and unless Larry Tribe says it's treason, I won't. But I hear what you're saying, but I'm not going to go beyond my expertise.
Well, I'm just asking your opinion. I'm not saying that they're ever going to charge you, but doesn't that seem like a plausible charge?
I've heard that, but I think that also Congress has a statute defining what. I think treason is a charge that gets thrown around quite a lot, and it's extremely serious given the punishment. And as far as I'm concerned, Russia is an adversary, but not an actual enemy. That's not my view. But again, I'm not a constitutional law expert, but talk to Larry.
Susan?
I'd like to know your opinion about the timing that you brought up, about whether you think it is rushing, the timing, and whether, because of the McGahn opinion, if they were to wait to see all of Giuliani and Mulvaney and Bolton would have to come to testify, whether that would make a difference politically to let it play out more, or whether you think it is better to get this done quickly.
Gosh, I wish I knew the answer to that question. I sometimes I have, you might say strong opinions, but in this case, I've heard arguments on both sides of this, and it's hard for me to get sort of through. But what the arguments seem to be, what are the arguments for just getting it? I'm thinking of a conservative named Tom Nichols who said this, which is, no matter what, no matter if even if someone shot someone on Fifth Avenue, even if you literally have the smoking gun, you're still not going to have the 60 votes in the Senate. 66 votes in the Senate. You're still not going to get to the 20 votes you might need, so there's that factor, in that the country just needs to move on, right? There's that argument. And that, I think Larry says this too, which is, this isn't, if something else comes up, then impeach again. And I think that, so the downside in rushing is exactly what you're saying, is we're just on the edge of getting maybe more testimony. And that the public could be brought along more. I've never seen such incredible hearings that were those 12 witnesses, and it was overwhelming. And I do this, I'm like a hearing junkie, for a living, and I could not take it in. I was wrecked that week by this. And how can anyone else who doesn't do this full time do it? So there's that argument. But then again, one thing I left on the first slide is we also, if you notice, we've been, since, we have yet another presidential election. there's still the same one. We're still having the 2016 election, right? It's still happening. So we're in this election year, and the question is it just time? Is it going to be too time consuming? So we'll see. What is your view? What do you think?
I've been in the same.
Can we take a vote?
Very similar to what you just said.
Can we take a vote? No one's locked in. Who thinks they should just stick with the Pelosi plan, get it done in December? Who thinks slow it down? Okay, I should raise my hand with both.
I like the Larry Tribe idea, just impeach him again.
Just in future. Yeah. And so let's talk about, since you brought that up, Susan, let's also talk about that other topic, which is similar, but why keep it so narrow? What about the emoluments clauses? What about, putting children in cages? What about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Who has a strong view on that? I mean, anyone think, who here, okay, let's do the quick vote. Who thinks just keep it narrow? It's probably the same people who say, oh, interesting, it doesn't overlap with the get it done people. Who thinks add in emoluments at least? Who thinks add Mueller in at least? What else? Okay, what else should we throw in there? What? Children in cages. Anything else? Yeah.
But the Mueller thing does seem to directly intersect with the narrow definition of this.
The obstruction piece of it. Or also the pattern.
But also the geopolitical issue of
Yeah.
what does raising corruption investigations in the Ukraine do for Russia? Namely, like, undermining the political legitimacy of the Ukraine's government seems to do quite a lot for Russia. And so there does seem to be an intersection of your investigation of this that goes beyond the expansion into child cages.
I know you're from Los Angeles and you're moving to New York when you graduate, but I forgot your name. Max. Thank you, Max. I think that's right. And I think for the reasons that you articulated, this will be included. And I think the Mueller evidence will be included not just in one article, not just the obstruction one, but maybe in the other one as well, related to abuse of office and soliciting help from a foreign government in the election.
Barbara, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm interested in the transition from the House to the Senate. Is it possible that the House could impeach and not take it to the Senate?
It is possible.
So he stands impeached, but you don't have to worry about him being exonerated by the Senate. Is that possible?
It's possible because you can't, the House manager has to actually say those magic words to the person in charge. I forgot which person in the Senate it is, a certain Senate.
You know what the magic words are?
I have them somewhere, but it's like, I have to pull it up on my computer. And but afterwards, we can look at them together.
So it's really up to Pelosi.
Yeah.
Yes. All roads lead to Pelosi.
Jeff, did you have your hand up? Sorry, Jeff. No. Okay, go ahead, Chuck.
One of the criticisms of the Mueller process was it dragged on and on and on and on, and really important stuff, really important indictments were spread out over months. And one of the arguments, I think, for getting it over with now is the Senate's probably not going to find for the House recommendations to impeach.
Right.
So in one respect, the impact of the 2 weeks of hearings and the focused nature of it seems that at least have more impact because it was concentrated. And I guess I'm wondering what...
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying, it reminds me of William Blake's line from something, I think it's something like, you don't know how much, you don't know that you've had too, you don't know if it's enough until you've had too much. And so you said, well, we know it's too much with Mueller and we think this is too little, but it's like, go from Blake to Goldilocks, what's the just right? And sometimes you just can't get it just right. The marriage of heaven and hell.
Jennifer, you said something just a minute ago about the danger of our republic, and it just struck a lightning bolt in me when you said that. And I'm, from my small amount of knowledge of the 30s history in Germany, this seems to be too like Hitler's rise to have for any kind of a consequence. I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on some of your feelings about what you just said regarding what the Senate will do and how we are at such a turning point.
So I think that my words had the effect that they were meant to have, but I think giving voice to the dystopia that fills my nightmares would not be actually productive. And, you know, we have these examples in our recent history, and we should be worried about them.
Talking about McGann's possible testimony, or at least the order that they're right now appealing. Am I wrong to at least believe that even if McGann were to go in front of, or go and be to testify, that he still has the option of claiming executive privilege for any number of questions that he might be posed? That the judge, as I recall, and I'm not sure if I'm right here, only said that this sort of blanket privilege of never having to appear, basically, is what is clearly not constitutional. Am I wrong? Can't he still assert an executive privilege? And therefore we don't get what we think we're going to get?
Well, just to be clear, only the executive can assert executive privilege. And so what McGann has been saying is, they've sort of been vaguely honoring the president's assertion of executive privilege. Yeah. And you can't, I think that we'll see if it's rejected at that blanket level, whether then it gets further litigated if he refuses to answer particular questions. I mean, you know, I didn't get through it, but I've been told it's the book Bleak House. I mean, this could be that Dickens novel where aren't they fighting over an estate forever or something? This could happen.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think that at some point there are some people we saw 12 Patriots who ignored that, and I think at some point, you know, he may actually find the courage to move forward. The only thing stopping them are their lack of consciences. None of those. Have you seen any of those people been hauled into court for testifying? They've only had death threats, but they're not being threatened by any judicial process.
Right.
I'm a little discouraged, probably nobody else.
I have that effect on people.
Ever since Trump began his campaign in 2016, I was prone to label him as the Teflon man, so nothing sticks to him. And now it looks like they're going to do the same thing. He said weeks ago that he wanted an opportunity to defend himself in front of these committees. Now he's not letting anybody do it. And he's going to keep doing that. And it's just like, I mean, it's firing at, you know, fish in a barrel where there's no fish. You know? And so how can we expect any other kind of outcome from this process than what we've already seen in the past? We've got to come up either with something really good so that a bunch of senators, Republican senators, stay away if the vote comes to the Senate, or we're just going to lose it. I mean, we're going to be where we were in the beginning.
Subject to wild cards, this cake is baked. Register people to vote.
David?
Thank you so much for the presentation. These impeachment trials, it seems, are always happening twice, as it were. Once in the formal mechanism you've outlined, but also with an election coming up, happening again in a lighter thing. And I'm wondering if you could walk us through your Citizens United background. I mean, it seems like the impeachment is polling fairly well, but is the money holding back on investing in the campaigns to see how this is going to shake out? Or is it actually bringing more money into the Trump campaign? You know, is there a sense that the big business, the wealthy, are sort of holding to see how this formal trial goes before they invest, or are they actually sort of doubling down on what they see as a hugely corrupt but really advantageous authoritarian leader?
So I haven't done empirical research and don't know that many billionaires personally. So I don't know that. I think he's had no trouble attracting money because he's given the tax cuts to the super wealthy and for conservatives put judges on the court that they want. And that's what they're willing to do. So I think, yeah, I do think, of course, that when you try to bring down a leader through the legal mechanisms designed to do so when they abuse their power, the people who support that person are going to use their money and that's gonna be what happens. But, you know, what I admire about what the House is doing and what Pelosi is doing is she did not want to bring this impeachment. And everybody pretty much knows, as I said, the cake is baked. But it takes real courage to still move forward because it's the right thing to do. And that's what we have. And I don't know what it looks like between now and 15 or 20 years from now. Maybe there's a happy ending here, but Trump didn't create some of the problems we have with corruption in politics. And the good thing is we're better organized now and we can keep working these issues. And I think that's a silver lining, I think.
Bill?
This may be a silly question, because I just don't know. But are the powers of the executive, the president, only articulated in the affirmative, or are they articulated in what the president may not, or no, shall not do anywhere?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. That reminds me of, is it? In Article 1, Section 9, Clause, I want to say 7, it says, this is the emolument clause, applies to the president. No person holding any office of profit or trust, including the president, without the consent of the Congress, can accept any present emolument, office, or title of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state. So there's that.
It's a may, not a shall.
It says shall.
I thought I heard you say
No,
that.
I said shall, I'm looking right from there. And then in addition, there's also a second place, and this is in Article 2, Section 1, and it says, the president shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them. So that in the presidential salary clause, this is why, both the domestic and foreign emoluments clauses.
Judy? Did you have?
Yeah, I'm going back to that lightning bolt, and you started to answer. So turning around what Jerry said, so what positive might come from this, and what might, in terms of our country, what positive might come from this, and what might it look like for us? Because all of this makes us feel so helpless. You know, there's, yeah, and. So,
I mean, the positive thing is that maybe, the positive thing is that he doesn't get reelected. And that even if he is reelected, we don't lose the House because he will continue to violate the law and we're gonna have real problems. There's no reason why he wouldn't continue. He has Giuliani now in Ukraine and saying that first he doesn't know, first he's his lawyer, then he doesn't know the guy, now he said he's gonna come back with a really good report. There's no reason he won't continue to do whatever it takes in anything, because he now has been told he really is Teflon Don. So we really have to hope he doesn't get reelected, or if he does, we have another impeachment then. There will be something at some point that even the Senate, even the Republicans in the Senate it might be too much for them. It might. We just have to hope. And I really do mean, that this is serious and we need to get the vote out. Remember that Hillary won the popular vote by 3 million votes and only lost the Electoral College in 3 states by around 78,000 votes. We can have turnout if we want it. And then the problem we have, is that when he loses, if he loses, the interregnum is going to be madness. My theory is that when it comes to January 20th, they just need to make sure he's out on the golf course and unlock the door so he can't get back in. But we have the transition, this will not be a peaceful transition, but we're going to get through it. This is, you have to be strong enough. This is something, who wrote this piece? It was just so, the historian Jill Lepore had this very short piece in the New Yorker, and it's going to be a long winter. But we can do this. We're here now. We can clearly see what's happening, and we just have to be strong. And I know we'll get through it. eventually. I just don't know between now, is it November that they get through it? Is it before November, is it November, or later? I'm hoping sooner than later.
Question. Susan, actually, we're gonna do just one more question. Did you have your hand up?
Yes, but
Please, no, go ahead, one more.
to what extent do you think that the pardon of Nixon contributed to his readiness to resign? And by implication...
She wanted a percentage.
Well, what I'm thinking is, we have talked about what what this man might be subject to after he leaves the presidency. But I'm just wondering whether that's one more thing in the toolbox or...
Yeah, I mean, I would expect, if he were not to be, if he were not to be reelected, then if I were him, I would resign, 2 days before. I would negotiate the pardon, and similarly, he could just do that anyway at any time, either now or if he has a second term. The problem, though, is while he can negotiate a pardon at the federal level, New York State isn't going to come to the table.
Well, Letitia James might.
I mean, she might.
If it was early, she might.
I mean, I shouldn't say they're not. I don't know, but it might be. You might need New York and Virginia, and maybe even Florida. Now that he's a resident there. But the question is, would the states come to the table, and why should they?
Only to get him to leave.
Right.
It's sort of the Spiro Agnew situation, I was thinking.
Right. But the difference is there's no memo that says a VP can't be indicted while they're in office. So he was.
He was already ready.
Yeah.
Years ago.
Jennifer, thank you.
Thank you.
So there's still coffee, tea, probably a few cookies left out there. Let's perhaps continue the conversation among one another. Thank you.
Notice.